It's one of those things where language fails us. If you say you're tired, people think, oh yeah, I didn't sleep well last night either. If you say you're exhausted, they might picture a tough workout or a long week at the office. But for people living with adrenal insufficiency, there is this other thing. It's not sleepiness. It's not just needing a coffee. It is a sudden, total systemic collapse that hits with the force of an explosion. Today we are talking about the fatigue bomb.
And that term, bomb, really isn't an exaggeration. When you look at the physiology of what is happening, it's a massive, instantaneous mismatch between supply and demand. It's a biological crisis.
We're breaking down an article from My Adrenal Life called The Fatigue Bomb of Adrenal Insufficiency. It dives deep into why this happens, the warning signs, and frankly, why it's so dangerous to ignore. Joining me is Eloise, and I want to start right at the sensation itself. The article describes it as flattening every system at once. That feels terrifying.
It is terrifying, especially the first few times it happens. You have to understand that for a healthy person, someone with working adrenal glands, energy is a curve. You get tired slowly. Maybe you hit a slump at 3 p.m. But for someone with Addison's disease or secondary adrenal insufficiency, energy isn't a curve, it's a cliff. The article makes this crucial distinction. This isn't about being sleepy. This is about your cells literally running out of the fuel required to function.
So let's get into the mechanics of that cliff. We know cortisol is the stress hormone, but I think most people associate stress with, traffic jams or deadlines. But biologically, stress means something much broader, right?
Exactly. That's the biggest misconception. In endocrinology, stress is just a demand on the body. Standing up is stress. Digesting food is stress. Regulating your body temperature on a hot day is massive stress. Cortisol is the currency your body uses to pay for all of that. It maintains blood pressure, stabilizes blood sugar, and fuels the brain. The fatigue bomb happens when the bill comes due and your body realizes, suddenly, that the bank account is empty.
And when that account hits zero, the lights go out.
Instantly, the body shifts into what the article calls conservation mode. It's a survival mechanism. If you don't have enough cortisol to keep your blood pressure up and run your brain at full speed and move your muscles, the body starts cutting power to non-essential systems. That's why people describe their limbs feeling like lead or their brain slowing down to a crawl. It's a brownout.
The article lists some specific triggers, and some of them seem obvious, like illness or physical exertion, but others caught me off guard. Emotional conflict or overstimulation. Why would an argument or a loud room drain your battery so fast?
Because emotional regulation is metabolically expensive. Processing conflict requires a surge of neurotransmitters and a heart rate increase. In a healthy person, the adrenal glands squirt out a little extra cortisol to manage that surge. But in adrenal insufficiency, that extra cortisol doesn't exist. You're running on a fixed dose of medication you took maybe 4 hours ago. So the emotional demand eats up the cortisol that was supposed to be keeping your blood pressure stable. The math doesn't work out and you crash.
It's like budgeting. You have $20 to last the whole day, and you just spent 15 of it on an argument.
Precisely. And the physiological consequences are immediate. One of the key points the My Adrenal Life piece highlights is the blood sugar connection. Cortisol helps regulate glucose. When cortisol dips, glucose often drops with it. Now your brain is starving for fuel. Then there's the blood pressure issue. Without cortisol to help constrict blood vessels, pressure drops and you stop getting enough oxygenated blood to the brain. That's the brain fog people talk about. It's not just feeling fuzzy, it's a lack of perfusion.
There's a specific mention in the text about adrenaline compensation. I found this fascinating. It says that the crash after adrenaline is brutal. Why is that specific combination, adrenaline without cortisol, so bad?
Think of adrenaline as the accelerator in a car and cortisol as the oil that keeps the engine from overheating. Adrenaline spikes your heart rate and mobilizes energy for a fight or flight moment. But cortisol is supposed to follow right behind it to sustain that energy and then calm the inflammation down afterward. If you have the adrenaline surge, maybe you got startled or had a near miss in traffic, but no cortisol to back it up, you burn through your resources in seconds. You're revving the engine with no oil. The crash that follows is essentially your system overheating and seizing up.
That explains why people with AI often say they feel worse after a stressful event is over rather than during it.
Yes, it's the post-adrenaline dump. And for those with primary adrenal insufficiency or Addison's, there's another layer, electrolytes. They often lack aldosterone, the hormone that holds onto sodium. Low sodium plus low cortisol is a recipe for disaster. The article calls it nuclear fatigue, which is a vivid but accurate description.
I want to pivot to the warning signs because the scary thing about a bomb is usually the surprise factor, but the article suggests there are tells, subtle signals that the explosion is coming. It lists things like yawning that comes out of nowhere or a hollow feeling in the arms. Those seem easy to miss.
They're incredibly easy to miss, especially if you're busy or distracted. That's the danger. We're conditioned by society to ignore minor discomfort. If you yawn, you think, I need to wake up, not, I need life-saving medication. But for an AI patient, that sudden, unprovoked yawning is actually air hunger. It's the body trying to get more oxygen because circulation is lagging. The hollow muscle feeling, that's the loss of muscle tone from low cortisol.
It also mentions sensory sensitivity, vision dimming or sound becoming overwhelming. I imagine that's the brain trying to reduce data input.
Spot on. Processing sensory input takes energy. When the brain detects a fuel shortage, it starts shutting down non-essential apps, just like a smartphone in low-power mode. Peripheral vision might fade. Background noise becomes unbearable because the brain doesn't have the bandwidth to filter it out anymore. The article emphasizes that recognizing these signs early is the only way to stop the crash. Once you're in the full fatigue bomb, you're already in a deficit that's hard to crawl out of.
So let's say you catch it, or maybe you don't, and the bomb goes off. What is the protocol? The article is very prescriptive here. It suggests a stress dose of hydrocortisone. For listeners who don't know, walk us through what that means.
A stress dose is an extra amount of steroid medication taken on top of the daily maintenance dose to mimic the natural cortisol spike a healthy body would produce. The article suggests a small amount, maybe 2.5 to 5 milligrams, can turn things around in 30 to 60 minutes. It's essentially manually refilling the gas tank.
But it's not just pills, right? There's a nutritional component mentioned. Protein, carbs, and salt.
Right, the medication replaces the hormone, but you still need the raw materials. Carbs to bring blood sugar up quickly, protein to sustain it so you don't crash again in an hour, and salt to help boost blood volume and pressure. It's a triad of stability. And the article makes a crucial point. You have to stop what you are doing. You cannot push through a fatigue bomb.
That pushing through mentality is so ingrained in us. No pain, no gain, right? But here, the article argues that pushing leads to a deeper crash or even an adrenal crisis. That feels like a massive psychological shift for patients to accept.
It's countercultural. We are taught that endurance is a virtue, but in adrenal insufficiency, endurance without cortisol is just biological damage. If you try to force your body to keep going when the tank is empty, you risk slipping into an adrenal crisis, which is a life-threatening shock state. The article says clearly, your body is begging to redirect its limited energy. Listening to that isn't weakness, it's survival.
This brings up the data aspect. I love that the article touches on wearables. We live in the era of the Apple Watch and Oura Ring. How can those actually help manage a condition like this? Is it just verifying what you already feel?
It validates the subjective experience, which is huge for patients who are often told their fatigue is in their head. But physiologically, wearables can show the crash before you fully feel it. You might see a sudden drop in heart rate variability, which is a key metric of stress resilience. Or you might see your heart rate spike when you stand up. That's orthostatic intolerance, a sign your blood volume or pressure is too low. Having that objective data, like, look, my heart rate jumps 30 beats when I stand, is powerful when talking to an endocrinologist.
That medical advocacy piece is tricky. The article offers scripts for explaining this to doctors and friends. It's not tiredness, it's a hormonal crash. Why is that distinction so hard for people to grasp?
Because everyone experiences tiredness. It's a universal human experience. So when someone hears fatigue, they project their own experience onto it. They think,
I felt like that after my flight to London. They don't have a reference point for my cells have stopped metabolizing glucose efficiently. By changing the language to hormonal crash or systemic shutdown, you force the listener to categorize it differently, as a medical event, not a mood or a lack of sleep.
It frames it almost like a diabetic with low blood sugar. You wouldn't tell a diabetic to just push through hypoglycemia.
Exactly. You wouldn't say, have a coffee and get over it. You'd give them juice or insulin or whatever the situation demanded. Adrenal insufficiency needs that same level of immediate biological respect. The fatigue bomb is a warning light on the dashboard. Ignoring it is like putting tape over the check engine light while driving 80 miles an hour.
There's a section on when to stress dose versus when to rest that I think adds a lot of nuance because clearly you can't just pop hydrocortisone every time they yawn. How do patients navigate that gray area?
That is the art of living with AI. It's not a perfect science. The article suggests looking for the instability markers. If the fatigue comes with nausea, dizziness, shaking, or clarity issues, that's a cortisol deficit. That needs medication. But if it's 9 p.m., you've had a long day, and you're just sleepy, that's normal human tiredness. That needs a pillow, not a pill. Learning the difference takes time, and honestly, a lot of trial and error.
I want to circle back to the why of all this. We talked about triggers, but looking at the broader picture, adrenal insufficiency is a condition of narrow margins. A healthy person has a wide buffer zone. An AI patient walks a tightrope.
That is the perfect analogy. The fatigue bomb is what happens when you slip off the tightrope. And the recovery isn't just bouncing back up. It takes time. The article mentions lying down for 10 to 20 minutes to redirect energy. That sounds simple, but physically it helps blood flow return to the brain without fighting gravity. It allows the limited cortisol you do have to focus on vital organs rather than keeping your leg muscles standing.
It strikes me that this condition forces a level of body awareness that most of us never develop. You have to know your heart rate, your emotional state, your hunger levels, your temperature constantly.
It's a full-time job. And that's the invisible burden of the disease. It's not just taking pills, it's the constant monitoring. The fatigue bomb represents a failure of that monitoring, or sometimes just bad luck. Maybe the heat was more intense than you thought. Maybe a virus was incubating that you didn't know about. It hits fast and it hits hard.
Let's talk about the emotional toll of the fatigue bomb itself. The article touches on sudden irritability or emotional heaviness as a symptom, but there's also the aftermath, the guilt of having to cancel plans, the frustration of being incapacitated.
That's huge. When your cortisol drops, your emotional regulation evaporates. You might snap at your spouse or burst into tears over a dropped spoon. It's chemical, not character. But afterward, when you're lying there recovering, it's easy to blame yourself. Why couldn't I handle that meeting? Why am I so weak? The article tries to reframe this. The fatigue bomb isn't you being dramatic. It's your body asking for help. Reframing it from a failure of will to a physiological signal is essential for mental health.
It reminds me of how we treat athletes. If a runner collapses at the finish line, we don't call them lazy. We say they reached their metabolic limit. This is the same thing, just with a much lower threshold.
And without the medal at the end, it happens in the grocery store or at your kid's soccer game. That's why explaining it to others is so vital. If your family understands the "I need to sit down" means my cortisol is crashing, they can jump into support mode, getting you water, finding a salty snack, rather than asking why you're being difficult.
One specific detail in the physiology section that we glossed over but feels important is inflammation. The text says, without sufficient cortisol, inflammation goes unchecked. We hear about inflammation constantly in health news, but usually as a chronic, long-term thing. How does it play into this sudden crash?
Cortisol is the body's most potent anti-inflammatory. It's the fire extinguisher. In a healthy person, microinflammation happens all day long, from digestion, from movement, from minor injuries. Cortisol puts those fires out immediately. In ADI, if your cortisol runs out, those fires flare up all at once. Acute inflammation causes what we call sickness behavior, that desire to curl up in a ball and not move.
It's a massive energy drain because the immune system is suddenly hyperactive, fighting phantom fires without the cortisol there to tell it to stand down.
So the fatigue is also, in part, an immune response gone haywire.
Partly, yes. It's a cytokine storm on a micro level. It all contributes to that feeling of being hit by a truck. It's multisystemic failure, metabolic, cardiovascular, and immunological.
This really drives home why the take a nap advice is so useless. You can't nap away a cytokine storm or a sodium deficiency.
No, sleep helps, of course, but you have to fix the chemistry first. That's why the stress dose is the first line of defense mentioned. You have to replace the missing hormone to stop the cascade. Once the chemistry is stabilized, then the rest can actually be restorative.
I want to end on the idea of respect that the article brings up. Why the fatigue bomb deserves respect. It frames the symptom not as an enemy, but as a messenger. That's a difficult shift to make when the messenger feels like it's ruining your day.
It is difficult, but consider the alternative. Without the fatigue bomb, without that overwhelming signal to stop, an AI patient might keep pushing until they go into full adrenal crisis, which can be fatal. The fatigue bomb is the body's emergency brake. It slams you to a halt before you drive off the cliff. It's unpleasant, it's disruptive, and it's scary, but it is also protective. It's the body saying, I cannot guarantee your safety if you take one more step, so I am making it impossible for you to take that step.
So respecting it means listening to it immediately, not negotiating with it.
Zero negotiation. You can't negotiate with biochemistry. When the bomb goes off, the day is effectively over, or at least on a major pause. You treat, you rest, you recover, and you don't apologize for it.
It's a powerful perspective on a brutal reality. For anyone listening who loves someone with adrenal insufficiency, I hope this gives you a glimpse into what's happening behind the scenes when they suddenly say, I can't.
And for those living with it, hopefully this validates that you aren't crazy, you aren't lazy, and you aren't imagining it. It's real physiology, and it deserves real care.
A huge thank you to the team at My Adrenal Life for the article that sparked this conversation. If you found this deep dive helpful, think of one person in your life who needs to understand this condition better and send this episode their way.